There's a moment, seconds after the final whistle in Atlanta, that tells you everything and explains nothing. Lionel Messi, fresh off one of the most improbable escapes in the history of this sport, walks toward the Egyptian bench. Words are exchanged that no microphone caught. And then Egypt's head coach, a legend of African football, a grown man in his 50s, raises both arms and crosses them into an X directly in front of Messi's face. That X is FIFA's official anti-discrimination signal. It exists to report racist abuse. Nobody to this day has explained why it was deployed at that moment at that man. Seconds later, a member of Egypt's backroom staff comes sprinting across the grass, straight at the Argentine captain, with enough intent that players formed a human wall and stadium security had to physically drag the situation apart. He was shown red and marched off, and somewhere in the middle of all that madness, the greatest footballer who ever lived stood there in tears. That's the ending. Now let me take you back and show you how a football match arrived at a crime scene. Because I promise you, every insane second of that finale earned its place. Strap in to understand the emotional weight of this night. You need to know what happened the night before. Cristiano Ronaldo, 41 years old, walked off a World Cup pitch for the final time in his life, eliminated, weeping. The book closed on one half of football's defining rivalry. And so the entire planet tuned into Atlanta, wondering if the universe was about to do something unbearably poetic, end both careers, one after the other, on consecutive nights, like a double funeral scheduled by fate itself. With 11 minutes left on the clock, that's exactly where we were headed. Argentina, the defending champions of the world, were dead, 2 goals behind. Messi, 39 now, had spent the evening looking mortal in ways we're not used to seeing. Shrugged off the ball by younger bodies, passes dying short, a shot sailing into the stands. And worse, far worse, a missed penalty, his second of the tournament, a first in the entire 96-year history of this competition. No player before him had ever failed from the spot twice at a single World Cup. The man who owns every meaningful record in the sport had just collected the one nobody wants. And standing on the other side of that story was a nation that had waited almost a century for this exact night. Here's what most casual viewers don't appreciate about Egypt. This is one of the most football-mad countries on earth, a place where the national team is practically a religion, and yet their World Cup record before this tournament was a tragedy in 3 acts. 3 appearances, 7 matches, 0 victories, not one. Their relationship with this competition is so cursed that it goes back to the very first edition in 1930, when Egypt intended to compete, and in one of sport's great pieces of dark comedy missed the ship to Uruguay. 96 years of showing up late, not this time. Their coach Hassam Hassan had promised his country a different kind of tournament, and his players delivered on it. They beat New Zealand to finally register a World Cup win. Then they held their nerve through a penalty shootout against Australia to reach uncharted territory. So when they walked out in Atlanta to face the champions, they weren't carrying pressure. They were carrying house money. And teams playing with house money are terrifying. You could see it inside the first quarter of an hour. Egypt pressed, snapped, hunted in packs, treated the famous shirts across from them like any other opponents. There was no awe in their body language, no reverence when the ball arrived at the feet of the number 10, just another man to be tackled. And from a corner, they drew first blood, a delivery swung in and met by Yasser Ibrahim with a header, so violent that Emiliano Martinez barely moved. 1-0. Ibrahim ran off looking like a man who couldn't quite believe his own life, and the Egyptian bench erupted like it already knew this night was going to be historic. It just didn't know which kind of historic. For context on how rare this was, Argentina hadn't gone into a halftime break trailing at a World Cup since the day Germany dismantled them 4-0 back in 2010. This simply does not happen to them, and it was about to get stranger. 6 minutes after the opener, Argentina got their lifeline. An Egyptian defender dragged down Nicolas Tagliafico inside the area. The French referee pointed to the spot without hesitation, and the script wrote itself. Messi, penalty, order restored. Except the strike was tame, telegraphed, and Egypt's goalkeeper Mostafa Chaber read it like a bedtime story, diving low to his left and pushing it away. And with that save, the record books gained their strangest new entry, Messi, alone in history, the only man to miss 2 penalties in one World Cup. But Chaber was only getting started, and this is where the night picked up a subplot worthy of a film. He denied Alexis Mac Allister from point-blank range. He watched a trademark Messi free kick kiss the outside of his post. He produced a stop from Julian Alvarez so unlikely that Alvarez just stood there staring at him, hands on head, doing the math on how that ball stayed out. And here's the part that gives me chills. Chaber's father, Ahmed, kept goal for Egypt at the 1990 World Cup, and his time wasting in that tournament was so egregious, so legendarily shameless, that it became part of the case for changing the laws of football itself. The back pass rule exists in part because of what his dad did on that stage. 36 years later, the son stood on the same stage and instead of stalling history, tried to make it, holding off the champions of the world with his bare hands. One family, 2 World Cups, 2 completely different legacies. Football writes these things, and we just get to watch. So the champions trudged in at the break, losing, confused and running out of answers. And the second half decided that wasn't nearly chaotic enough. Early in the second period, Egypt sprang forward with the kind of move that ends up in tournament montages. A surging run down the left, Salah threading a pass with surgical weight, and Zizou, a striker whose parents literally named him after a Brazilian great, applying the finish 2-0. Atlanta shaking, Egypt in dreamland. Then the broadcast cut to the review room, and the review room started scrolling backwards past the finish, past Salah's pass, past the halfway line. Back roughly half a minute in real time, 17 seconds in playing time to the very origin of the move, where an Egyptian player had lightly grabbed Lisandro Martinez's shirt and brushed his toe. That was the crime. On that basis, the goal was deleted. Now, I want to be precise here because Egypt's rage wasn't irrational, and it deserves a proper explanation rather than a shrug. This entire tournament has been officiated under an explicit philosophy, announced publicly by FIFA's refereeing chief before a ball was kicked. Let the game flow, tolerate normal contact, keep whistles to a minimum. And the data proves it took hold. Fouls have fallen to their lowest rate in 3 World Cups, down from the numbers in Qatar and well below Russia. For weeks, players have been tugged, nudged, and clipped in full view of referees who waved play on, exactly as instructed. Then, in the biggest moment of Egypt's footballing existence, a video official went spelunking through the footage to punish precisely the kind of contact the whole tournament had been told to ignore. And if you want the comparison that made Egyptian blood boil, earlier in this competition, a raised boot caught an Ecuadorian defender flush in the face during the build-up to a German goal. No intervention, goal stood. A boot to the face survives review. A shirt tug doesn't. Was the Zizou decision technically legal? Yes, the contact sat within the attacking sequence, which makes it reviewable under the letter of the law. But legality and consistency are different animals, and on this night only one of them showed up. Egypt weren't beaten by the rulebook everyone else played under. They were beaten by a second, stricter rulebook that materialized out of nowhere. Here's the twist though, and it's the detail that makes this match immortal. The injustice didn't even work. 8 minutes after having their goal erased, Egypt simply scored again. A move down the right left, Noel Molina spinning like a turnstile. The cutback found Zizou, and this time the finish was clean. The build-up spotless. The goal unappealable. 2-0. For real. No rewind available. And now do the math on the stakes. Egypt 0 knockout wins in a century of trying. We're 11 minutes from the quarterfinals. The reigning champions were 11 minutes from elimination. And Messi was 11 minutes from following Ronaldo into retirement's waiting room on back-to-back nights. Inside the stadium, you could actually feel the story being pre-written. Cameras kept cutting to Argentine fans with their hands over their mouths. Broadcasters were already reaching for the elegy. The end of an era, 2 GOATs gone in 48 hours. The torch passed whether anyone wanted it or not. Somewhere, editors were assembling the farewell montages. That's how finished this looked. Which is exactly the kind of arrogance football loves to punish. What happened next gets called a miracle, but I want to push back on that word, because miracles don't have tactical explanations and this one does. Lionel Scaloni made a substitution that quietly changed the geometry of the entire match. Lautaro Martinez on, and Messi shifted from the congested middle out toward the right flank. All night, Egypt had smothered him centrally, 3 defenders collapsing on his first touch. Out wide, suddenly, there was oxygen space. Time, the 3 things a 39-year-old genius needs. In the 79th minute, from that right channel, Messi hung a cross into the box, and Christian Romero attacked it like a man personally offended by the scoreline, powering a header beyond Schubert. 2-1. The stadium's energy flipped in an instant. You could feel the belief physically change ends. Minutes later, Messi went on a dribble that belonged to 2015, slaloming through bodies, rolling back the odometer, nearly laying on an equalizer. And then, in the 83rd, Egypt made the mistake you cannot make. A clearance fell apart inside their own box. The loose ball dropped toward the one human being on the planet you'd least want it to find, and Messi met it on the half volley with technique, so pure that Schubert got both hands to the shot and still couldn't keep it out. 2-2. Pause on what that goal actually meant. It was his 21st at World Cups, stretching a record only he holds. His 8th of this tournament, moving him clear of Mbappe and Haaland in the race for the Golden Boot, and it made him the first player ever to score in 6 consecutive World Cup knockout matches. All in the same 90 minutes in which he became the first man to fail from the penalty spot twice in one tournament. The worst record in the sport's history and one of its greatest, achieved by the same person, on the same night. If you tried to invent a more perfect summary of what Messi is, you couldn't, because that has always been the strange contract with this player. He doesn't dominate matches from minute one anymore. He haunts them. He drifts, he walks, he looks half absent for long stretches, and opponents start believing the danger is past. Then a single loose ball drops in a single wrong place, and 80 minutes of anonymity gets converted into immortality in one swing of a left boot. Egypt defended him almost perfectly for almost the entire evening. Almost against this man has never once been enough. But this match had one final act, and it's the one that turned heartbreak into fury. Deep into stoppage time, Egypt threw everything forward one last time. Salah carried the ball into the Argentine penalty area, went down under a challenge from Julian Alvarez, and appealed with every fiber of his body. The referee's whistle stayed silent. The review room stayed dark, and Argentina did what champions do to a team stretched in desperation. They broke at full speed, Lautaro delivered from the flank, and Enzo Fernandez arrived at the far post to head in the winner. 3-2, 92nd minute, the comeback complete from 2 goals down later in a match than any side in World Cup history had ever recovered. And football, being the cruelest storyteller there is, made sure of one final detail. The move that killed Egypt's dream began with Salah losing the ball. Their icon, their number 10. The man an entire nation projects itself onto, unwittingly opening the door to their execution. Now the non-review of Salah's appeal. Egyptian fans see it as the smoking gun, so let's actually explain the mechanism, because it's stranger than any conspiracy. When contact happens inside the box, video officials aren't asking, was that a foul? They're asking, was that a penalty? And a penalty demands a higher degree of contact than an ordinary free kick. The touch on Salah didn't clear that elevated bar, so no review and the counterattack goal stood. But here's the absurdity. Had that identical contact occurred one single yard further back, outside the white line, the standard drops. The check likely happens, and Egypt probably get a free kick and a chance to see out the game. 1 yard of grass. That's the entire distance between Egypt surviving and Egypt flying home. 2 soft contacts, half an hour apart, judged by 2 different thresholds, and both verdicts landed against the same team. Each decision is defensible on its own. Put them side by side and try to explain them to a heartbroken Egyptian, I'll wait. Which brings us back to where we started. The full-time scenes which now make horrible sense. Messi approaching the Egyptian bench. The exchange nobody heard. Hassam Hassan throwing the anti-racism X into his face, a gesture that earned Hassan a booking and has never been explained by him, by FIFA, or by the Egyptian Federation. The staff member charging at Messi with genuine aggression, Argentine players closing ranks around their captain, security wrestling everyone apart, another red card brandished. The most decorated footballer alive needed protecting on the pitch, seconds after producing one of the great comebacks. That sentence should not exist, and yet, then came the press conference, where Hassan detonated whatever was left of diplomatic language. He declared his team victims of injustice. He questioned the integrity of the officiating from the opening minutes. And then he crossed the line no coach crosses lightly, suggesting openly that the powers running this tournament may have preferred to keep Messi in it, that Argentina, in his words, had been supported at every level. His striker Zizou stood behind every syllable, insisting the unfairness had been visible from kickoff. Why is there no fairness in sport? That was the question Hassan left hanging in the room, and FIFA's answer, when reporters came asking, nothing. Total silence. Make of that what you will, but silence has never once made a suspicion smaller. And understand the weight of what Hassan actually did there, because coaches complain about referees every single week of the football calendar. That's background noise. This was different in kind, not degree. A national team manager, at a World Cup on the record, suggested the tournament itself might have a preferred outcome. That's not a complaint about a decision. That's an allegation about the institution. Coaches have been fined and banned for far less. He said it anyway, in front of the world with his federation standing behind him. Either that's a man consumed by grief, talking himself into a conspiracy, or it's a man who genuinely believes something is broken and decided the punishment was worth saying so. Neither possibility is comfortable. Now I have to do the unpopular thing and be fair, because Argentina's side of this story is being buried under the outrage. And it shouldn't be. No official scored those 3 goals. There is no conspiracy on earth that makes Romero outjump an entire penalty box, or gives a 39-year-old the balance to strike a dropping ball first time into the roof of the net, or puts Enzo Fernandez's forehead on a cross in the 92nd minute with a country's entire history pressing down on him. Roy Keane, a man allergic to compliments, described this Argentina side as street fighters who simply refuse to die, and there's no higher praise in his vocabulary. Enzo himself put it plainly afterward. This group doesn't know how to surrender, and 4 years after Qatar, they're starving to repeat it. Scaloni was so emotional at full time he couldn't get through his own interview. That is not a team being escorted through a tournament. That is a team clawing its way through one. So here's the truth this match leaves us with, and it's uncomfortable precisely because it refuses to pick a side. Both stories are real. Argentina authored a genuinely heroic comeback that required no favors, and Egypt were genuinely wronged, not by a fix but by a review system that judges identical contact by different standards depending on which side of a painted line it occurs, and that abandoned the tournament's own officiating philosophy at the worst conceivable moment. Egypt didn't lose because somebody in a suit wanted Messi in the quarterfinals. Egypt lost because they couldn't protect a two-goal lead for 11 minutes against the best comeback artists on the planet, and because the rulebook shape-shifted on them twice in one half. Two separate wounds, both of them real. Neither one healing anytime soon. Strip away the controversy for a second, and the core of this night is almost unbearably human. A 39-year-old man, publicly humiliated by a penalty miss, physically outmatched for 80 minutes, staring at the same exit door Ronaldo had walked through 24 hours earlier, and he simply declined. Found a pocket of space on the right wing and rewrote the evening. At full time, his teammates launched him into the air and thankfully caught him on the way down while he wept. Ronaldo's tears the previous night were a goodbye. Messi's were a stay of execution. So Argentina march on to Kansas City, hunting something no nation has achieved since Brazil in the late 50s and early 60s, back-to-back world titles. Egypt fly home with the finest performance their country has ever produced, a goalkeeping display people will still be talking about in 30 years, and a grievance that will burn in Cairo for a generation. 11 minutes, that's how close we came to the biggest shock of this World Cup. Instead, we got the greatest comeback in its history, and a fight about it that's only just beginning. One last image before I let you go. When the cameras swept the pitch at full time, past the celebrations and the confrontations, they found Mostafa Choubert on his knees in his 6-yard box alone, staring at nothing. 9 saves. A performance his father's generation could only dream about. A family name rewritten from a punchline about time wasting into a badge of honor, and none of it enough. Somewhere in Cairo, a father who once frustrated the world from that same position watched his son break his heart trying to save it. Football gives with one hand, you already know what it does with the other. So you tell me, because I've genuinely gone back and forth 10 times making this video, was that the most legendary comeback this tournament has ever seen? Or a robbery dressed up as one? Pick a side in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and hit subscribe because the quarterfinals start Friday. This tournament has completely lost its mind and you do not want to watch what happens next from the outside. See you there?